The ice was a living thing. It clawed at Phalyra's cheeks, its invisible talons sinking deep into the thin fabric of her tunic. Each gust of wind was a predator's roar, promising to rip the last vestiges of warmth from her bones and leave her a frozen statue in this endless, white wasteland. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, and her toes had been numb for hours. Just 2 days. It had only been 2 days since the rejection, since she had been cast out of the Blackwood Packlands, but it felt like a lifetime of winter had descended upon her. Her wolf, a frail and shimmering ghost within her, whimpered. She was as pale as Phalyra's own skin, with fur the color of snow and eyes the color of blood. A curse. That's what they had always called her. An ill omen. A pale ghost born under a bad moon. Phalyra squeezed her eyes shut, the memory of Rovan's face twisting in disgust as sharp and cold as the sleet currently lashing her skin. I, Rovan of the Blackwood Pack, reject you, Phalyra, as my mate. His voice had boomed across the silent clearing, each word a physical blow. The pack had watched, their faces a mixture of pity, scorn, and relief. He was the future of their pack, a strong, vibrant beta soon to challenge for alpha. He couldn't be saddled with her, a flawed, weak albino omega. He had not just rejected her, he had condemned her. You are a blight on this pack, he'd spat, his dark eyes burning with contempt, a walking curse. Your weakness would poison my bloodline. You are nothing. The final word had echoed, sealing her fate. Nothing. The Alpha had decreed her exile immediately, citing pack unity. No one had spoken up for her. Not a single soul. They had simply watched as she was given a thin tunic, a stale loaf of bread, and a shove toward the northern border, into the heart of the coming blizzard. Now, the bread was long gone, and the cold was all that was left. Her only hope was a half-remembered story from her grandmother, a woman who had shown her the only kindness she had ever known. A story of an old trapper's cabin, deep in the disputed lands between territories. A place of refuge, forgotten by time. If she could find it. If it even existed. It was a fool's hope, a dying ember in the frozen cavern of her chest. But it was all she had. Was this what it felt like to break completely? She had always felt fragile, like a piece of spun glass. Throughout her childhood, she had been hidden away, a source of shame for her parents before a rogue attack had claimed them. After their deaths, she had become the pack's burden, fed scraps, given the worst chores, and endured the constant whispers and pointed fingers. The mate bond, when it had snapped into place between her and Rovan a week ago, had felt like a cruel joke from the moon goddess herself. For a fleeting moment, a tiny, stupid part of her had hoped he might see past her pale hair and skin, past her weak wolf, to the person beneath. That hope had been crushed into dust. Now, trudging through snow that reached her thighs, she felt less like spun glass and more like that dust, scattered and insignificant, about to be erased by the storm. Her legs trembled with each step, the muscles screaming in protest. She stumbled, falling face first into a snowdrift. The impact was soft, almost welcoming. It would be so easy to just lie here, to let the cold take her, to sleep, to finally be nothing. But the whimpering of her wolf, faint as it was, urged her on. Her grandmother's face swam in her memory, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. You have a strong heart, my little moonbeam, she used to say, her fingers gently stroking Phalyra's white hair. That is a strength no alpha can command. A single hot tear escaped Phalyra's eye and froze instantly on her cheek, a tiny diamond of sorrow. For her grandmother, she would take one more step, and then another. The landscape was a blur of white on white. Trees were skeletal figures draped in shrouds of snow. There were no tracks, no signs of life. just the howling wind and the desperate, ragged sound of her own breathing. She was so tired, so profoundly weary of it all. The fight for survival felt pointless when there was nothing to survive for. No one was waiting for her. No one would even know she was gone. She was a ghost, just as Rovan had said. Another hour passed, or maybe it was a minute. Time had lost all meaning, stretching and compressing with the shrieking of the wind. Just as her knees began to buckle for what she knew would be the final time, she saw it. A dark shape against the oppressive white. A smudge of black, barely visible through the swirling snow. A roofline. A surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. The cabin. It had to be. It was real. Staggering, falling, crawling. She forced her body forward, her numb hands clawing at the snow. It was a derelict thing, listing to one side, its wood blackened by age and weather. But it was shelter. It was a chance. The door was swollen shut, but a section of the wall beside it had rotted through, leaving a gap just large enough for her to squeeze through. She collapsed onto the dusty floor inside, the sudden silence and stillness a shock after the roaring chaos of the storm. The air was frigid, but at least the wind couldn't reach her here. For a moment she just lay there gasping, her body shuddering uncontrollably. She had made it. She had survived the storm. The relief was so immense it was painful, a sob catching in her throat. Slowly, shakily, she pushed herself up, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The cabin was a single room, empty save for a rusted iron stove in the corner and a pile of old rotting furs. And something else. In the darkest corner of the room there was a shape, a massive form, unnaturally still. At first she thought it was just a deeper shadow, but then a faint metallic scent reached her nose. Blood. And beneath it, the smell of wolf. Fear, stark and primal, shot through her. A rogue? Had she traded the slow death of the storm for a quicker, more violent end? She froze, every muscle tensed, ready to flee back into the blizzard. But the shape didn't move. It didn't stir. There was no low growl, no sound of breathing. Cautiously, her heart hammering against her ribs, she took a hesitant step closer. The scent of blood was stronger now, thick and cloying. As her eyes adjusted further, she could make out the details. It was a wolf. An enormous wolf, larger than any she had ever seen, even larger than her pack's alpha. Its fur, where it wasn't matted with dark, wet blood, was a startling pure white, just like hers, an albino. He was lying on his side, his breathing shallow and ragged. A deep, ugly gash ran along his flank, oozing blood onto the floorboards. Several other wounds marred his thick coat, and the acrid, sickening smell of silver hung heavy in the air around them. Silver-laced weapons. Someone had tried to kill this magnificent creature. He was dying. Every instinct screamed at her to run. A wolf this large, even wounded, was a threat. He could be delirious from the pain and the silver poisoning, could lash out. Saving herself was the only logical thing to do. She had fought so hard to get here, to find this tiny pocket of safety. She deserved to keep it for herself. But then the wolf let out a low, pained whine, a sound of such profound agony and loneliness that it echoed in the empty spaces of her own heart. She saw not a monster, but a kindred spirit. Another outcast, another creature bleeding out its life in the dark, alone. Her grandmother's words came back to her. "You have a strong heart." What was the point of surviving if it meant becoming as cold and unfeeling as those who had hurt her? She had nothing left. No pack, no mate, no hope. But she had this. A choice. To walk away and let him die, or to stay and offer what little comfort she could. Her own life felt so worthless. Perhaps she could give its final moments some meaning by easing another's suffering. The decision settled over her, quiet and absolute. She wouldn't run. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and blood, and moved toward the dying wolf. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice hoarse and shaky. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf's head twitched at the sound of her voice, and one eye, a slit of startling luminous silver, cracked open. It fixed on her, hazy with pain, but there was no aggression in it. Only a deep, soul-crushing weariness that she understood all too well. She knelt beside him, her frozen limbs protesting. The gash on his side was worse up close. It was deep, torn by claws, and the flesh around it was blackened, a telltale sign of potent silver poisoning. He needed the silver cleaned out, the wound stitched. She had no tools, no medicine, nothing but her own 2 hands. "I don't have much," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "But I can't just leave you." She looked around the dilapidated cabin. Her eyes fell on the rusted stove. If she could get a fire started, she could melt some snow for water to clean the wounds. It was a long shot. There was no kindling, no dry wood. Her gaze landed on the splintered remains of a wooden chair in the corner. It was old and dry. With trembling, numb fingers, she began breaking it apart, the sharp splinters digging into her skin. She didn't feel the pain. She worked with a frantic, desperate energy, arranging the driest pieces inside the stove. But how to light it? She searched her pockets, knowing they were empty. There were no flints, no matches. Despair began to creep back in. It was hopeless. He was going to die, and her grand gesture would amount to nothing. She slumped against the cold metal of the stove, her head bowed. Her own wolf stirred within her, a flicker of an idea passing between them. It was a wild, dangerous thought. Something only Omegas, with their strange, subtle connection to the pack's emotional core, were rumored to be able to do. A spark, not of fire, but of life force, of spirit. It was a myth, a fairy tale told to Omega pups. But what else was there? She pressed her palm against the stove, right over the pile of wood splinters. She closed her eyes, shutting out the dying wolf, the cold, the hopelessness. She focused inward, searching for that tiny, flickering flame of her own spirit. The one her grandmother had called a strong heart. She pictured it, nurtured it, drew on every ounce of pain and love and sorrow she possessed, and pushed. A faint warmth bloomed under her palm. She gasped, her eyes flying open. A tiny blue spark danced between her skin and the wood. It flickered, then caught. A small, hungry flame licked at a splinter, then another. Within seconds, a small, crackling fire was alive in the stove, casting a warm, dancing light across the dark cabin. She stared at it, breathless. It had worked. The cost was immediate. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and her vision swam. It had taken something from her, a piece of her own meager life force, but it was worth it. Re-energized by the small victory, she scrambled back outside, using a piece of rotted floorboard to scoop up clean snow, packing it into a dented, discarded tin she'd found near the stove. As the snow began to melt, she turned her attention back to the wolf. "Okay," she said softly, approaching him again. "This is probably going to hurt." She tore a long strip from the hem of her already tattered tunic. It wasn't clean, but it was. Better than nothing. Dipping the cloth into the now warm water, she gently, carefully, began to clean the edges of the great gash on his side. The wolf shuddered violently when the warm water touched his poisoned flesh, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. But he didn't snap. He didn't move to attack her. That single silver eye stayed fixed on her face, and in its depths, she saw not anger, but a flicker of dawning awareness, of trust. For hours, she worked. She cleaned his wounds as best she could, her touch surprisingly steady. The fire in the stove provided a small circle of warmth, a fragile bastion against the cold. The task was gruesome. The silver had to be painstakingly picked out, flake by tiny, burning flake. Each time she removed a piece, the wolf would flinch, but he remained still, enduring it with a stoicism that broke her heart. As she worked, she talked. The words spilled out of her in a quiet, steady stream, filling the silence. She told him about her pack, about Rovan's rejection. She told him about being an albino, the shame and the isolation. She spoke of her grandmother's kindness, the only warmth in a childhood of ice. She confessed her deepest fear, not of dying, but of having never mattered at all. He said I was nothing, she whispered, her fingers pausing their work as she stared into the fire. And the worst part is, I think he was right. I am nothing, just a ghost. My own wolf is pale and weak. I can't fight. I can't hunt well. I can't even provide a strong alpha with strong pups. What good am I? She looked back at the giant wolf, his silver eyes still watching her. At least you're magnificent, she said, a sad smile touching her lips. Even like this, wounded and dying, you're beautiful, powerful. No one would ever call you nothing when the wounds were as clean as she could get them. She was faced with another problem. They needed to be closed. She had no needle, no thread. She looked at her own white hair, long and surprisingly strong. Another crazy idea. With a sharp piece of wood, she sawed off a long lock. It felt like sacrificing a part of herself. She then found a thin, sharp shard of bone from some long-dead animal in the corner, and painstakingly threaded the hair through a crack in it. It was a clumsy, primitive needle, but it would have to do. Brace yourself, she warned him, her voice thick with exhaustion. The first stitch was agony to inflict. He let out a choked cry, his massive body convulsing. Tears sprang to her eyes, for his pain and her own. But she gritted her teeth and continued, her hands moving with a strange, newfound purpose. Stitch by clumsy stitch, she pulled the torn flesh together, her own hair becoming the thread that bound him. When she was finally done, hours later, she was swaying on her feet. The fire was dying down, and the cabin was growing cold again. The wolf's breathing was steadier, deeper. The bleeding had stopped. She had done all she could. She was so cold, so empty. The effort of starting the fire and the emotional toll of the night had drained her completely. She sank to the floor beside him, too weak to move. The thought of huddling in the pile of rotting furs across the room was too much. The floor was freezing. With the last of her strength, she dragged herself closer to the great white wolf. He was a furnace of warmth, a stark contrast to the icy air. Hesitantly, she curled up against his broad back, laying her head on his less injured side. He was still a wild animal, a stranger. This could be the stupidest thing she had ever done. But as she settled against him, a deep sigh shuddered through his massive frame. He shifted, not away from her, but closer, tucking her into the curve of his body. The warmth was immediate, seeping into her frozen core, a profound comfort she hadn't felt since she was a child in her grandmother's arms. Tucked against this dying, magnificent stranger, Felira closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel entirely alone. And as she drifted into an exhausted, dreamless sleep, she felt a strange sense of peace. If she died here tonight, at least her last act had been one of kindness. Perhaps that was enough to count for something. Felira awoke to the sound of voices, deep, commanding voices that vibrated with power. Her eyes snapped open. Sunlight, pale and weak, was streaming through the cracks in the cabin walls. The storm had passed. For a terrifying second she didn't know where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The cabin, the wolf. She was still curled against him, His body was warm, his breathing even. He was alive. The relief was so sharp it made her gasp. But the voices were closer now, just outside the cabin. Panic seized her. Rogues? Hunters? His Majesty's scent is strongest here, Gideon, one voice said. The silver is thick in the air. Spread out, another voice commanded. This one deeper, filled with an authority that sent a shiver of fear down her spine. Find him. Now His Majesty? Falira's blood ran cold. These weren't rogues. They were warriors, organized, powerful, and they were looking for the wolf she had spent the night saving. Her mind raced. Had she interfered with something she shouldn't have? Was he a prisoner who had escaped? Would they punish her for helping him? She scrambled away from the white wolf, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The wolf stirred, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he sensed the presence of the others. His silver eye opened, clear and alert now, and fixed on the broken wall. The gap in the wall was suddenly filled by a massive silhouette. A man ducked to enter, his sheer size seeming to shrink the small cabin. He was clad in black leather armor trimmed. In silver, the crest of a snarling wolf's head emblazoned on his chest. His eyes, hard as flint, swept the room, landing first on the great white wolf and then on her. He was followed by two more warriors, equally imposing. Falira shrank back against the wall, making herself as small as possible. She was trapped. The lead warrior, the one called Gideon, let out a sharp breath, his gaze locked on the wounded wolf. "Your Majesty," he breathed, his voice tight with shock and relief. He dropped to one knee. The other two immediately followed suit. "Your Majesty?" The words didn't compute. Falira stared from the kneeling warriors to the white wolf, her mind reeling. The wolf pushed himself up, his movements stiff with pain. He was unsteady on his feet, but he stood, his head held high, radiating an aura of pure, undiluted power that dwarfed even that of the warriors. And then, the air in the cabin shimmered. It thickened, crackling with an energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. The white wolf's form began to blur, to shift. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded, and limbs elongated. Falira watched, her eyes wide with terror and awe, as the magnificent animal melted away, replaced by a man. He stood where the wolf had been, naked and splattered with dried blood, yet utterly regal. He was tall, impossibly so, with a body carved from marble, all lean muscle and corded strength. His skin, like his wolf's fur, was a flawless, milky white. His hair was a cascade of pure white silk that fell to his shoulders. He turned his head, and his eyes met hers. They were the same eyes as the wolf. Not red, like hers, but a brilliant, piercing silver, like twin moons. He was an albino, just like her. "King Theron," Gideon said, his head still bowed. "We feared the worst. The assassins, they are dealt with," the man, the king, said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone, the same voice she had heard giving orders outside, but now it held a different quality. A quiet power that commanded absolute attention. He looked down at his side, at the crude stitches of her own white hair holding his flesh together. He touched them gently, a strange expression on his face. Then his silver eyes lifted and found hers again. He took a step toward her. Falira flinched, pressing herself harder against the wall. This was a king, and she had touched him, tended to him like some common stray. The enormity of her transgression struck her like a physical blow. They would kill her for this. "You," he said, his voice soft, yet it carried across the small room. His gaze was intense, searching. "You did this? You saved me?" Falira couldn't speak. She could only nod, her body trembling uncontrollably. She was an outcast Omega, a nothing. She had just performed amateur surgery on the most powerful wolf on the continent, King Theron, the legendary Shadow Wolf King, ruler of the vast northern territories. Her life was forfeit. Gideon, the warrior, rose to his feet, his gaze finally falling on her properly. He scowled. "A stray Omega, Your Majesty? What is she doing here?" He took a menacing step toward her. "Did she have something to do with the attack?" "Stand down, Gideon," Theron commanded without taking his eyes off Phalyra. At his quiet words, the massive warrior froze instantly, his expression chastened. Theron took another step closer. He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his incredible eyes. He studied her face, his gaze lingering on her white hair, her pale skin, her crimson eyes. She braced herself for the disgust, the revulsion she had seen 1,000 times before. But it never came. Instead, his expression softened, a look of profound wonder dawning on his face. And then, it happened. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through her, originating from the point where his gaze met hers. It was like lightning striking her soul, a torrent of warmth and light, and a feeling so intense it stole her breath. It was 1,000 times stronger than the faint flicker she had felt with Rovan. This was a tidal wave, a supernova. It was the mate bond, slamming into place with the force of a divine decree. Theron inhaled sharply, his silver eyes widening. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of such dazzling relief and joy that it transformed his regal features into something breathtakingly beautiful. "Mine," he breathed, the word a sacred vow. Phalyra's world tilted on its axis. Number. No, it couldn't be. Her mind screamed in denial. This was a hallucination, a fever dream brought on by cold and starvation. The moon goddess could not be this cruel. To give her a true mate, only for him to be a king, a god among wolves? To give her this impossible hope only to have it snatched away when he realized what she truly was? "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. She shook her head, tears of panic and disbelief welling in her eyes. "No, you don't understand. I'm... You are my mate," Theron stated, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. It was not a question. It was a fact. "I can't be," she cried, her voice cracking. The terror was overwhelming. This was too much, too high to fall from. "I'm a curse. Look at me." She gestured wildly at her own face, her hair. "I'm an albino. A weak Omega. I was cast out. I'm broken. I'm nothing." The words she had lived by her whole life came tumbling out, a desperate, hopeless litany. Gideon and the other guards stared, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. An albino Omega? An outcast? As the king's mate? It was unthinkable. Theron's smile faded, replaced by a look of fierce intensity. He closed the remaining distance between them, ignoring her flinch. He reached out, not to grab her, but to gently cup her cheek. His touch was electric, sending another wave of the bond's intoxicating warmth through her. It felt like coming home. "Broken?" he murmured, his thumb stroking her skin. "Nothing?" He shook his head, his silver eyes burning into hers. The wolf who dragged a dying stranger twice her size into shelter is not weak. The woman who faced down silver poisoning with nothing but her own courage is not broken. He glanced down at his side. The Omega who used her own hair to stitch a king back together is not nothing. His gaze returned to her face, and it was filled with a reverence that shattered her. "In my kingdom, the white wolf is not a curse. It is a sacred sign, a mark of the moon's direct favor. We have been waiting for a white wolf to be born among the royal line for 500 years." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that was for her alone. "I have been king for a century. I have searched every pack, met every alpha's daughter. I began to believe the goddess had forgotten me, that I was destined to rule alone. He paused, his silver eyes glowing with emotion. She did not forget. She was merely hiding my greatest treasure where a fool would not find her. My Luna, my Queen Luna, Queen. The words were alien. They didn't belong to her. She was Phalyra, the ghost, the curse. But the conviction in his voice, the raw adoration in his eyes, was a truth so powerful it defied a lifetime of lies. Before she could process any of it, he straightened up, turning to face his men. One of the guards quickly draped a thick, fur-lined cloak over the king's shoulders. Theron pulled it around himself, then turned his commanding gaze back to his beta. "Gideon," he said, his voice once again ringing with royal authority. "This is Phalyra. She is my fated mate. Your Luna Queen." He looked back at Phalyra, who was still pressed against the wall, trembling like a leaf in a storm. He offered her a small, reassuring smile. "She saved my life. You will show her the same respect you show me. All of you." Gideon's jaw was tight, his eyes wide with disbelief. But he was a soldier, loyal to his core. He bowed his head low, his voice stiff but obedient. "As you command, Your Majesty." The other two warriors followed suit, murmuring, "My Luna." Phalyra felt like she was drowning. It was all too fast, too much. Just yesterday she had been freezing to death, a worthless outcast. Now she was being called a queen by warriors who could snap her in two without a thought. The whiplash was making her dizzy. This had to be a mistake. A terrible, beautiful mistake that would end in more pain than she could possibly imagine. Theron must have seen the panic in her eyes. His expression softened again. "We are leaving this place," he said gently. "You will come with me to the palace. You will be safe there. You will have warm clothes, food, a soft bed. You will have anything you desire." He held out his hand to her. "Please, Phalyra." His hand was large and strong, but his gesture was not a command. It was an invitation, a plea. She stared at it, her heart warring with itself. Her mind screamed at her to run, to hide, to not trust this impossible dream. But her soul, awakened by the vibrant hum of the mate bond, yearned to take it. The warmth from his body was a siren call to her frozen spirit. After a lifetime of cold, could she deny herself this fire? Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her own trembling, grimy hand and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, gentle but firm. The contact sent a fresh wave of sparks up her arm, a dizzying sensation of rightness, of belonging. His hand was so warm, so safe. For the first time since she could remember, a fragile seedling of hope began to push its way through the frozen soil of her heart. Maybe this wasn't a mistake after all. The journey to the Shadow Wolf Palace was a blur. King Theron, despite his still healing wounds, refused to be carried. He walked, holding Phalyra's hand the entire way, his powerful presence a silent shield against the shocked and curious stares of his warriors. He had given her his own thick cloak, wrapping it around her small frame. It smelled of pine, winter, and a raw power that was uniquely him. The scent was intoxicating, a balm to her frayed nerves. The palace itself was not a building, but a city carved into the heart of a mountain. Towers of dark, gleaming stone reached for the sky, connected by elegant bridges that spanned dizzying chasms. Waterfalls cascaded down the mountainside, freezing into fantastical sculptures of ice. It was beautiful and intimidating, a fortress of unimaginable power. As they entered the main gates, guards in black and silver armor snapped to attention, their mailed fists striking their chests in a resounding salute. Their gazes were disciplined, but Phalyra could feel their curiosity as they took in her ragged appearance, her small hand held firmly in their king's. She instinctively tried to pull her hand away, to shrink into the shadows, but Theron's grip tightened reassuringly. "Keep your head high, my Luna," he murmured, his voice for her ears alone. "You belong here more than any of them." She was immediately whisked away by a team of female attendants, their faces polite but unreadable. They led her to a vast chamber with a sunken bathing pool filled with steaming, fragrant water. They helped her out of her filthy tunic and Theron's heavy cloak, their hands gentle but impersonal. Felira stood exposed and shivering, her pale, thin body covered in bruises and scratches, her crimson eyes wide with apprehension. She felt like a stray cat brought into a showroom, utterly out of place. But there were no sneers, no whispers. They bathed her with a quiet efficiency, washing the grime from her skin and the blood from her hair. They treated her with a detached reverence that was almost more unnerving than open hostility. When she was clean, they wrapped her in a robe of impossibly soft fleece and led her to an adjoining room. The room was larger than the entire cabin she had grown up in. A massive bed piled high with furs and silk pillows dominated one wall. A fire roared in a marble hearth, casting a warm glow over everything. Wardrobes stood open, filled with gowns and tunics in rich velvets and soft wools, all in shades of white, silver, and pale blue. "His Majesty had these prepared," one of the attendants said softly. "He said these colors would suit the new Luna." Felira touched the sleeve of a silver velvet gown. The fabric was softer than anything she had ever felt. It was all too much. The luxury, the deference, the title of Luna. It felt like a costume she was being forced to wear, a role she didn't know how to play. The fear of failure, of being found wanting and cast out again, was a cold knot in her stomach. Later, dressed in a simple but elegant white wool dress, she was led to a private dining hall. Theron was already there, seated at a long, polished table laden with food. He had also bathed and changed. He wore simple black trousers and a loose white tunic that did little to hide the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. His long white hair was damp, and in the soft light of the candles, his silver eyes seemed to glow. He looked every bit the mythical king from the stories. He stood as she entered, a real smile warming his features. "Felira, you look radiant." He pulled out a chair for her, an act of chivalry so unexpected it made her blush. The meal was a quiet affair. Felira was too nervous to eat much, though the food smelled divine. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to look at her more closely and see the flaw, the weakness, the reason she was unworthy. Theron seemed to sense her unease. He didn't press her to eat or talk. Instead, he spoke quietly about his kingdom, about the valley they overlooked from the window, about the ancient history of his people. He asked her nothing about her past, as if he understood that the wounds were still too raw. His patience was a gift, a gentle space for her to simply breathe. "I know this is overwhelming," he said finally, his silver eyes meeting hers across the table. "I do not expect you to become a queen overnight. I do not expect anything from you but a chance." "A chance for what?" she whispered. "To prove to you that what you feel is real," he answered, his voice earnest. "To show you that you are not broken and you are not a curse. To earn the trust of the woman who saved my life." His sincerity was a powerful current, pulling her in. But the undertow of her past was just as strong. The voices of her tormentors were loud in her memory. Worthless. Ghost. Nothing. Over the next few days, Theron was true to his word. He gave her space, but he was a constant, reassuring presence. He took her for walks in the palace's vast indoor gardens, where strange, luminous flowers bloomed under the mountain. He showed her the royal library, a cavernous hall filled with thousands of scrolls and books, its air thick with the scent of old paper and knowledge. He would read to her, his deep voice weaving tales of ancient heroes and magic. During these moments, Philira felt the ice around her heart begin to thaw. She saw the man beneath the king, a man who was lonely, who carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, and who looked at her with a hunger and a tenderness that made her soul ache. The mate bond between them was a constant humming warmth, a silent conversation that grew stronger each day. She found herself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile. She even laughed once, a sound so unfamiliar it startled her. But her past was a persistent shadow. Not everyone in the palace was as welcoming as the king. The staff were respectful to her face, but she caught their whispers when they thought she couldn't hear. The white ghost. An Omega Luna? What was the king thinking? The most open hostility came from the head cook, a large, sour-faced woman named Magra. When Philira had tentatively entered the kitchens one morning, curious about the source of the wonderful smells, Magra had sneered at her openly. "We don't allow strays in the royal kitchens," the cook had said, her arms crossed over her ample chest. "This is a place of work, not a charity house for Omegas." The way she said the word was an insult, laden with disgust. Philira had frozen, the old shame washing over her. "I'm sorry," she stammered, backing away. "I was just... Whatever you were, be it somewhere else," Magra had snapped, turning her back. Philira had fled, the brief, fragile confidence she had been building crumbling into dust. She had hidden in her room for the rest of the day, the cook's words echoing Rovin's. It was a stark reminder of her place. She was an Omega, a stray. She was playing dress-up in a queen's clothes, and at any moment someone would rip the costume away and show everyone the worthless creature underneath. When Theron found her that evening, her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply sat on the edge of her bed, took her hand, and held it. "Their fear and their prejudice are not a reflection of your worth," he said softly, as if he could read her mind. "They are a reflection of their own smallness. Do not let their ignorance dim your light, Philira. It is the brightest thing I have ever seen." His unwavering belief in her was a shield. But she was still afraid. She was terrified of the bond, of the hope it represented. To hope was to invite pain. To love was to risk rejection. And the thought of being rejected by him, by this magnificent, kind man who was her other half, that was a pain she knew she would not survive. So she held back. She stayed behind her walls of ice, letting his warmth touch her but never letting it melt her completely. How could she be a queen to a kingdom when she couldn't even command the respect of a cook? The summons came a week after her arrival. King Theron was holding his semi-annual tribute ceremony, where the alphas of his vassal packs came to swear fealty and report on their territories. It was a major political event, and he expected her to be there, at his side. "You don't have to speak," he had told her gently, seeing the panic in her eyes. "Just stand with me. Let them see you. Let them see that their king has found his queen fear warred with a burgeoning sense of duty." The bond urged her to stand with him, to support him. Her own terror screamed at her to hide. But the memory of his words, "Do not let their ignorance dim your light," gave her a sliver of courage. She would do it. For him. The great hall was a breathtaking, terrifying cavern of polished black stone and glowing crystals. Hundreds of wolves were gathered, the most powerful alphas and betas from across the northern territories. The air was thick with power, with testosterone and pride. Philira, walking at Theron's side, felt like a minnow swimming among sharks. She wore the silver velvet gown, and her white hair had been braided with delicate silver chains. She knew she looked regal, but she felt like an imposter. She kept her eyes down, her hand clutching Theron's arm like a lifeline. He led her to the twin thrones on the raised dais, his own carved in the shape of a snarling wolf, hers a mirror image, but sleeker, more elegant. He sat, and she perched nervously on the edge of her seat. One by one, the alphas came forward, bowing low before their king. They presented their tribute and gave their reports. Most of them shot curious, guarded glances at her, their minds clearly reeling at the sight of an unknown albino female on the Luna's throne. But Theron's powerful presence kept their questions at bay. And then she saw him. Striding into the hall with his alpha was a familiar, arrogant figure. Rovan. Her breath caught in her throat. The blood drained from her face. It was the Blackwood pack. Her old pack. They were vassals to the Shadow Wolf King. Of course. Why hadn't she realized? Rovan looked smug, confident, his eyes sweeping the hall with the air of a wolf on the rise. He hadn't seen her yet. Felira wanted to disappear. She wanted to sink through the stone floor. She instinctively tried to shrink back into her throne, to hide her face behind a curtain of her hair. Theron felt her terror through the bond. He placed his hand over hers, his grip warm and steady. "I am here," his touch said. "I will not let anyone harm you." The Blackwood Alpha, a grizzled older wolf named Maldrake, bowed before the thrones. "Your Majesty, the Blackwood Pack brings tribute and reaffirms our loyalty." Theron nodded curtly. "Your loyalty has been adequate, Lord Maldrake." His voice was cool, a subtle warning that did not go unnoticed. It was then that Rovan's gaze drifted to the Luna's throne. His eyes passed over her, then snapped back, his jaw dropping. He stared, his face a comical mask of disbelief. He saw the silver gown, the throne, the hand of the king resting on hers. But all he could truly see was the pale skin, the white hair, the red eyes, the ghost. A sneer, ugly and familiar, twisted his handsome face. He thought this was some kind of joke, some elaborate prank. He couldn't conceive of any other reality. While his alpha was still bowed, Rovan did the unthinkable. He broke rank. He strode forward, past his alpha, right to the foot of the dais, his eyes locked on Felira. The entire hall fell silent, the air crackling with tension at his breach of protocol. "What is this?" Rovan's voice was loud, contemptuous. He pointed a finger at her. "What is this worthless ghost doing in the Luna's throne? Did you crawl here to beg for scraps after we cast you out?" Felira felt the blood rush to her head. The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on her, stealing her breath. Every eye in the hall was on her. They were all seeing her through his eyes now, a worthless, cast-off Omega. He took a step up onto the dais, his hand reaching for her arm. "Your little game is over, Stray. You will not embarrass our pack further. You are coming with me." Before his fingers could touch her, Theron moved. He didn't rise from his throne. He simply lifted his head, and his silver eyes, now burning with the cold fury of a winter storm, fixed on Rovan. "Kneel," Theron said. The word was not loud, but it was imbued with an alpha command so absolute, so overwhelming, that the very air in the hall seemed to solidify. Rovan froze, his hand hovering inches from Felira's arm. A look of confusion, then terror, crossed his face. His body began to tremble, his wolf fighting a battle it could not possibly win. With a choked gasp, his legs buckled beneath him, and he crashed to his knees before the throne, his head bowed, his body shaking with the force of the king's will. A collective gasp went through the hall. Theron rose slowly from his throne, a terrifying specter of silent rage. He walked around his throne and stood over the kneeling Rovan, looking down at him as if he were something vile he had found on his shoe. "You dare!" Theron's voice was a low, deadly growl that vibrated through the stone floor. "You dare! Enter my hall, break my protocol, and lay your filthy tongue upon my queen?" My queen. The words rang through the silent hall like a thunderclap. Rovan's head snapped up, his face pale with dawning horror. Lord Maldrake looked as if he were about to be sick. "You call her a ghost?" Theron continued, his voice dripping with venom. You call her worthless? You, a short-sighted, arrogant pup who cannot see the sun for the brightness of his own pathetic ambition. You had a treasure in your grasp, a gift from the goddess herself, a soul so pure and a heart so strong that she faced death to save her king. He gestured to Phaelira, who sat frozen on her throne, tears streaming silently down her face. But these were not tears of shame. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a vindication so profound it was physically painful. This is Phaelira, your Luna Queen, Theron boomed, his voice reaching every corner of the hall. The woman you cast out into a blizzard to die. She is my mate, my other half. Her worth is greater than you and your entire bloodline could comprehend in 1,000 lifetimes. He leaned down, his face inches from Rovan's. You called her nothing. But it is you who are nothing. You are a fool. A blind, pathetic fool. And your insult to my queen will not go unanswered. He straightened up, his gaze sweeping over the terrified Blackwood Alpha. Lord Maldrake, your pack is on probation. This thing, he gestured to the trembling Rovan, will be stripped of his rank and his name. He will serve as the lowest Omega in your pack for the rest of his miserable life. Every day, he will be reminded of the jewel he threw away. Is that understood? Lord Maldrake bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. Yes, Your Majesty. Forgive us. Forgive my pack's blindness. It is not your forgiveness to beg, Theron said coldly, turning his back on them. He walked back to Phaelira, his expression softening instantly as his eyes met hers. The fury vanished, replaced by that tender, all-consuming devotion. He knelt before her, before the entire assembly of alphas, and took her hands in his. Are you all right, my love? He asked softly, his voice full of concern. Phaelira looked from his worried face to the humiliated form of Rovan being dragged away by his alpha, to the hundreds of powerful wolves now staring at her with newfound awe and respect. The ice around her heart did not just crack. It shattered. It exploded into 1,000,000 pieces, washed away by the flood of her tears and the overwhelming power of his love. The ghost was gone. The curse was broken. Rovan hadn't seen her worth, but Theron had. The king of all wolves had seen her, and he had chosen her. He had defended her. He loved her. She finally understood. Her worth was not something others could give or take away. It had been inside her all along, in her heart, in her kindness, in the strength it took to survive. Later that night, after the tumultuous ceremony had ended, they stood on a private balcony overlooking the starlit valley. The air was cold, but Phaelira felt nothing but warmth, a fire burning brightly in her chest. Theron stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her head. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For what? He murmured into her hair. For defending my queen? For punishing an insect who dared to insult her? I would burn the world for you, Phaelira. She turned in his arms, her own arms wrapping around his neck. She looked up into his beautiful silver eyes, and for the first time, she did not see a king. She saw her mate, her other half, her home. The fear was gone, replaced by a certainty so deep and absolute it felt as ancient as the mountain itself. No, she said, her voice clear and strong. Thank you for seeing me. She rose on her toes, and with all the love and gratitude in her healed heart, she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was everything the bond had promised and more. It was fire and lightning, ice and warmth. It was a gentle homecoming and a wild claiming. It was the sealing of a promise made by the stars, the joining of two souls destined to be one. In his arms, she was not an Omega, not a ghost, not a curse. She was Phaelira. She was his, and she was a queen. Their mating ceremony was held a month later, under the light of a full moon. Philyra stood beside Theron on the highest peak of the mountain, robed in a gown that seemed woven from moonlight itself. The northern packs howled their approval, a symphony of joy that echoed through the valleys. Her own wolf, no longer frail but vibrant and glowing with the power of the bond, rose within her, answering their call. She was no longer the rejected Omega. She was the moon's chosen Luna, the white wolf of prophecy, united with her king. Her supposed flaw, the albinism that had caused her so much pain, was now celebrated as a divine mark, a symbol of their reign. She never forgot the cold, or the hunger, or the feeling of being nothing. She used that memory, not as a source of pain, but as a well of compassion. One of her first acts as queen was to establish shelters in every territory, havens for the outcasts, the different, the forgotten. She ensured that no one in their vast kingdom would ever feel as lost and alone as she once had. Standing beside her mate, her hand in his, she looked out at their kingdom, a realm she would now protect with all the strength of her heart. The journey had been paved with sorrow, but it had led her here. It had led her home. Her rejection had not been an end, but a violent, necessary beginning. It had broken her open so that she could be remade, stronger and more radiant than before, into the queen she was always destined to be.